My parents forced me to give a room in my house to my jobless brother. When I objected, he said, "You're a cold, bitter woman who'll die alone." 7 days later, my dog went missing, my bedroom door was smashed, and my closet was empty. I just smiled because I'd moved all the valuables a week before. I've always been the responsible one in my family. I'm the one who went to college, who got a stable job, who actually took the time to save up for a house. Meanwhile, my younger brother Caleb, who's 31 now, has never held down a job for longer than 6 months, never lived independently, and is always looking for someone to rescue him from his own mistakes. I've always been the cold and bitter one, apparently, because I don't believe in enabling his behavior. But my parents begged me to let him stay with me when he hit rock bottom, and I reluctantly agreed. A week later, my dog went missing, my bedroom door was smashed open, and all my things were gone. And the worst part? Caleb still thinks he's the victim. Here's how it all went down. I had never been one to get involved in family drama. I lived a quiet life in my small 2-bedroom house in the suburbs of Portland, Oregon. My dog Daisy, a border collie, was my companion, and my days consisted of work, taking care of my home, and catching up with friends every now and then. Life was peaceful, until Caleb came into the picture. Caleb, my younger brother, had always been the charming screw-up. He was the one who could sweet-talk his way out of any situation, the one who convinced our parents to bail him out of every mess he got himself into. He had this way of making everything seem like someone else's fault, and if you weren't careful, you'd end up feeling guilty for not helping him. It wasn't that I didn't care about him. I did, but there was a limit to how much I could enable him. I got a call from my mother one morning. It started like any other conversation with her. "Grace, sweetheart, we need to talk," she said, her voice soft but with a hint of urgency. I sighed, preparing myself for whatever was coming. "What's going on?" "Caleb's hit another rough patch," she began, and I immediately braced myself. "He lost his job again, and he doesn't have anywhere to go." My heart sank. Caleb was 31. He should have been independent by now. He'd been living off other people for years, bouncing from one friend's couch to another, and each time it was the same story: he'd get a job, lose it, and then need help. "I don't know, Mom. I'm not sure I have the space," I said, already dreading the conversation. I lived in a modest house with only 2 bedrooms, one of which was my sanctuary, my bedroom. The other was a guest room, which I used for storage. I wasn't exactly eager to give up my space for Caleb. "Grace, please. He's family," my mom pleaded. "He really needs someone right now. You can't just turn your back on him." I felt the guilt hit me like a punch in the stomach. The last thing I wanted to do was say no. But deep down, I knew how this would play out. Caleb would stay for a few weeks, maybe a month, and then he'd be gone again, leaving behind a trail of chaos and disappointment. "I'll think about it," I said, trying to put off the decision. But in the end, I couldn't say no. When my mom asked again a few days later, I caved. I didn't have the strength to disappoint her, and frankly, I didn't think I could stand the guilt. So, Caleb moved in. It wasn't as though I expected him to change overnight. I knew his habits: disorganization, laziness, and the constant blame game. But when he first walked through my front door, dragging a duffel bag behind him like he was still in his 20s, something inside me tightened. I watched him settle onto the couch like it was just another stop on his endless journey. He didn't make an effort to hide the fact that he was just here to wait things out, whatever that meant. "Thanks for letting me crash here, Grace," he said with a lazy grin, tossing his bag onto the floor and flopping onto the couch. "Yeah, sure," I replied, trying to stay calm. "Just make sure you're not a burden. I have work and things to do." He didn't respond, just sank into the cushions, flipping through TV channels. I didn't know whether to feel anger or sadness. This was Caleb, always expecting the world to give him a free ride, always taking without giving anything in return. The next morning, when I got up to get ready for work, I found Caleb still sprawled out on the couch, his phone in hand, barely a sign of him having done anything productive the entire day. I didn't say anything, it wasn't worth it. He was in the guest room now, I knew that much, and I thought if I left him alone, he might figure things out. But, as always, I was wrong. A few days passed, and I started noticing things. Little things. He'd use my bathroom, leaving it in a mess, not even bothering to wipe down the counters. He'd leave his dirty dishes in the sink. And when I went to check the guest room to see if he was unpacking, it was clear he hadn't even touched the bed. It was as though he'd come here, expecting everything to be handed to him. Then, one afternoon, it happened. He came into the living room and casually dropped a pounds hell. Hey, I was thinking, if I'm gonna be staying here for a while, I might as well take the guest room. You can give it up for a few months, right? It's not like you're using it for anything else. I stood there, frozen. The guest room was the only other room in my house. It wasn't like I had a lot of space, but it was mine. My sanctuary. I don't think that's a good idea, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I'm already letting you stay here. I don't have a lot of space, and I need my room. He let out a frustrated sigh, rolling his eyes. Grace, come on. It's just a room. You're being selfish. I'm your brother, and you can't even do this one thing for me? I felt the anger rising inside me. It's my house, Caleb. You don't get to demand things from me. I'm doing you a favor by letting you stay here at all. He smirked, looking at me as if I were the one in the wrong. You're a cold, bitter woman who's going to die alone. Just remember that. I wanted to scream at him, to tell him exactly how much I hated his manipulative attitude, but I didn't. Instead, I just turned and walked away, feeling the tension growing between us. The next week felt even worse. Caleb didn't seem to make any effort to find work, didn't help around the house, and spent most of his days lounging on the couch. I couldn't help but feel like a stranger in my own home. The frustration grew each day, but I kept telling myself I had made a promise to my mom, and I couldn't back out now. Then, 7 days later, everything changed. I woke up early that Saturday morning to take Daisy for a walk, as I always did. The sun had just begun to rise, casting a soft light over the neighborhood. I enjoyed these quiet moments with my dog. She was my only constant, my loyal companion in a life that often felt like it was slipping out of my control. When I returned home, I immediately felt that something was off. The door was slightly ajar. I didn't remember leaving it unlocked. I called out for Daisy as I stepped inside, but there was no response. My heart started racing. I rushed up the stairs to my bedroom. The door was wide open, and that's when I saw it, everything was gone. My closet was empty. My jewelry, my clothes, all of it was gone. I froze for a moment, my mind racing. Where was Daisy? Where were all my things? I rushed to Caleb's room, my anger flaring. He was still asleep, his body sprawled out on the bed like he had no care in the world. I shook him awake, my voice trembling with rage. Where's Daisy? I demanded. He blinked, confused. What? I don't know, Grace. Maybe she ran off. I didn't believe him. Not for a second. I turned and ran to the backyard, calling Daisy's name, but she wasn't there. No sign of her anywhere. My dog was gone. And so were my things. I didn't need to ask him any more questions. I knew exactly what had happened. I didn't know how much longer I could keep my composure. My house was a wreck, my dog was missing, and Caleb was acting like nothing had happened. The feeling of betrayal ran deep, but I wasn't going to let him take anything else from me. I knew what I had to do, but I wasn't ready to confront him yet. Not today. I walked through the house, my head spinning. The emptiness in my room felt like a weight pressing down on my chest, suffocating me. It wasn't just the stolen things, it was the violation of my space, my trust. Caleb had crossed a line, and I knew in my gut that this wasn't just another one of his reckless decisions. He had planned it. I couldn't stand to be near him, not right then. He was still sprawled out on the bed, as though nothing had changed. I grabbed my phone, dialing the police with shaky hands. I didn't know if they could do anything about my missing dog, but I needed to report it. I needed something to happen. I couldn't let Caleb get away with this. While I waited for the officer to arrive, I tried to calm myself down, but it was hard. The house felt like a strange place now, foreign and hostile. I went back to my bedroom to check one more time. Maybe something was overlooked, something small, something that could give me an idea of what had happened. The closet door stood ajar, mocking me. It felt like the last piece of the puzzle had been ripped away, leaving me exposed. As I stood there, staring at the empty space, my mind wandered back to everything I had let slide over the past week. Caleb's lazy behavior, his sense of entitlement, the way he had guilt-tripped me into letting him stay. The worst part was how I had made excuses for him, justifying his actions because he was my brother. I wanted to blame myself, to think that maybe I had done something wrong, but deep down, I knew I hadn't. Caleb had chosen this path on his own. He always had. The police arrived about 20 minutes later. I gave them a brief overview of the situation, and they took notes. They asked me questions about Caleb's whereabouts, but I couldn't tell them anything definitive. I knew he had been home when I left, but I couldn't be sure about anything else. They promised to look into it, but they didn't seem hopeful. "I'm sorry, ma'am. We'll do what we can," the officer said, handing me a business card. "If you find anything else or if he contacts you, let us know." I nodded, but I wasn't sure they'd be able to help me. I was starting to feel like I was in this fight alone. The next few days were a blur of frustration and confusion. I kept trying to piece together the events that had led to this point. I couldn't shake the feeling that something more was going on, that Caleb hadn't just stolen my things in a moment of desperation. No, this felt personal. The way he had taken everything of value, including Daisy, was a statement. It wasn't about survival or needing help. It was about control. About showing me that he could do whatever he wanted, and I couldn't stop him. I decided to take a step back. I needed to think. I couldn't let my emotions dictate my next move. But there was something that gnawed at me, something that I couldn't ignore. It hit me one night, as I sat alone in the living room. I hadn't seen Caleb for hours. He'd retreated to his room after I'd confronted him, and I hadn't heard a peep from him since. I knew Caleb well enough to know that he wouldn't leave without at least one final act of defiance. I needed to check his room again. This time, I wasn't going to just look around. I needed answers. I waited until late that evening, when I assumed he'd be out or gone. I snuck into the guest room, my heart pounding in my chest. The door creaked as I opened it. I stepped inside, and for a moment, I just stood there, taking in the disarray. It was a familiar mess, the kind Caleb always left behind, a jumble of clothes, dirty dishes, and wrappers. But there was something new now, something that made my blood run cold. On the nightstand, there was a small envelope, just barely visible under the pile of Caleb's belongings. I reached for it, my hands trembling. It was addressed to me. My heart skipped a beat as I tore open the seal. Inside was a letter. A short one. But it hit me harder than anything I had expected. "I'm done here. Don't bother looking for me. I'll be just fine. I've got what I need. You can keep pretending everything's okay, but you and I both know you're just waiting for me to screw up. Don't call me. Don't expect anything from me. If you want to be alone, that's on you." The words were a slap in the face. Caleb had taken what he wanted, and now he was walking away. It wasn't about survival. It wasn't about hitting rock bottom. It was about making me feel small. About showing me that he could take whatever he wanted and leave without a care. The letter felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to throw it away, to forget it ever existed, but I couldn't. Caleb had left me with more than just the emptiness in my house. He'd left me with the realization that no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't fix him. I couldn't save him from himself. The next morning, I decided to take action. I wasn't going to let Caleb's behavior control me anymore. I wasn't going to let him drag me down into the same pit of disappointment and frustration I had been living in for the past week. I contacted a local animal rescue group to help with finding Daisy. I gave them a description and some details about the situation, hoping they could find her. I also called a locksmith to change the locks on my doors. I didn't feel safe anymore, not in my own home. And I wasn't going to allow Caleb to come back in and do more damage. As the days passed, I focused on regaining control of my life. I spent hours organizing my house, reclaiming my space, piece by piece. I made plans to meet with friends, to get back into a routine. It was hard, and the pain of what had happened was still there, but I was slowly healing. And then, 3 days later, I got a call from the rescue group. "We found Daisy," the woman on the phone said. "She's safe. She's been brought to a local shelter. You can come pick her up." I felt a rush of relief wash over me, and for the first time in days, I could breathe again. I rushed to the shelter to pick up Daisy, my loyal companion, and when I saw her wagging her tail behind the gate, I couldn't help but smile. She was back where she belonged, with me. But Caleb? I still hadn't heard from him. And part of me knew I wouldn't. I didn't think he cared enough to reach out, and honestly, I wasn't sure I wanted him to. I had learned a valuable lesson through all of this. I couldn't change Caleb. I couldn't fix him. But I could control my own life. I could set boundaries and take care of myself. And I was finally starting to feel like myself again. I still didn't know exactly where Caleb was, or what he was doing. Part of me wanted to keep looking for him, to make him face the consequences of what he had done. But another part of me knew that wasn't my responsibility anymore. All I could do was move forward. A week had passed since Daisy was safely back in my arms, and the house, though quiet, was starting to feel like home again. It wasn't easy, but with each passing day, I was finding peace. There were still moments of anger, moments when I thought about Caleb and the way he had stolen from me, but I refused to let him continue to control my emotions. He had taken enough. I spent my days slowly rebuilding the small fragments of my life that had been disrupted. I contacted the insurance company about the stolen items and filed a claim, though I wasn't sure it would amount to much. Still, it felt like I was doing something to right the wrongs. Then, one afternoon, about 10 days after Caleb's departure, I received an unexpected phone call. It was from a private number. I debated whether or not to answer, but the voice on the other end was unmistakable. "Grace?" Caleb's voice was as casual as ever, like we hadn't just had the worst week of our lives. I froze for a moment, the anger rising in my chest, but I forced myself to remain calm. "What do you want?" "I just wanted to check in, see if you were doing okay," he said, his tone almost too sweet. "I've been thinking about everything that happened, and I think it's time we talked." I clenched my jaw. "You think? After everything, now you want to talk?" He sighed, as though my reaction wasn't what he expected. "Grace, come on. I didn't mean for things to get out of hand. I know I messed up, but I just needed some time to get myself together, you know? I think we could work something out, like we always do." I could practically hear the fake sincerity in his voice. It made my skin crawl. He was trying to worm his way back in, to convince me that everything could go back to normal, that I could let him back in as if nothing had happened. But nothing would ever be normal again. I had been used for the last time. "I don't think there's anything to work out, Caleb," I said, my voice steady despite the rising fury inside me. "I've had enough." His voice dropped, and for the first time, I heard a hint of frustration. "What are you talking about? You really don't think I deserve another chance? We're family." I laughed, bitterly. "You don't get to use that excuse anymore. You're not the victim here. You took everything, Caleb. You stole from me, my dog, my belongings, my trust, and you expect me to just forget about it? To pretend like it's all okay?" There was a long silence on the other end. I could tell he wasn't expecting this level of confrontation. You don't get it, do you? I was just doing what I had to do to survive. I could hear the victim mentality in his voice, the same line he had always used to justify his behavior. But this time, I wasn't buying it. You weren't surviving, Caleb. You were exploiting me, like you always do. And I'm done. You're not welcome back in my life. I didn't give him a chance to respond. I hung up. The next few days were tense. I knew Caleb wasn't just going to let things go. He had a way of creeping back into people's lives, finding ways to manipulate them into giving him another chance. I braced myself for whatever he would do next. But this time I was ready. It wasn't long before I got a call from a mutual acquaintance. Someone I hadn't spoken to in a while, a neighbor who had known Caleb. They told me Caleb had been seen at a local pawn shop, trying to sell some of my stolen belongings. My heart sank, but a small, cold part of me felt satisfaction. I had already anticipated that he would try something like this. And I wasn't going to let him get away with it. I thanked the neighbor, my mind already racing through the possibilities. I knew exactly what I had to do. The following day, I drove to the pawn shop. It was a small, run-down place in the outskirts of town, the kind of place you wouldn't expect anyone to visit unless they were desperate. I walked in, trying to act casual, but my mind was focused. I knew what I was looking for. I approached the counter, and after a brief conversation with the clerk, I was shown a small pile of items they had recently purchased. As I scanned the collection, my heart skipped a beat when I saw it, my grandmother's necklace, a piece of jewelry I had inherited after she passed away. It was one of the things Caleb had stolen, one of the things I knew I would never see again. But there it was. Without hesitation, I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the necklace. Then, I did something Caleb would never expect. I called the police. This wasn't just a personal issue anymore, this was theft, and I wasn't going to let him walk away from it. Not this time. The police arrived within the hour, and I explained the situation. They were able to verify that the necklace and several other items were indeed mine. The pawnshop clerk cooperated, confirming Caleb had been there and tried to sell them. Within the next 24 hours, Caleb was arrested for possession of stolen property and fraud. The fact that he had attempted to pawn stolen items was enough to get him into legal trouble, and the police were able to track down more of my belongings, which had been sold off to other shops around town. It wasn't the kind of revenge I had originally thought of. I hadn't planned for the police to get involved, but it felt right. Caleb had stolen from me in the worst possible way, and he needed to face the consequences of his actions. This wasn't about making him suffer, it was about making sure he finally took responsibility for the damage he had caused. In the weeks that followed, I heard from the lawyer handling Caleb's case. He was trying to negotiate a plea deal, but I didn't care. The moment he was arrested, I knew I had made the right choice. It wasn't about punishing him, it was about making sure he couldn't hurt anyone else the way he had hurt me. As for me, I continued to move forward. I found peace again in my home. Daisy and I resumed our walks, and I took comfort in the quiet moments that I had come to cherish. My house was finally mine again, truly mine, without the shadow of Caleb hanging over it. It wasn't perfect. I wasn't perfect. But I had learned something valuable throughout this entire ordeal. Sometimes, the most powerful thing you can do for yourself is to stop enabling others, to stop letting their chaos and dysfunction invade your life. Sometimes, walking away is the hardest thing to do, but it's also the best thing you can do for your own peace of mind. And as for Caleb? Well, I hope he learns his lesson. But at the end of the day, that's not my problem anymore.